We are talking goalies today on the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm going to be joined shortly by Mike Amato of Sportsnet to talk about Jeremy Swayman, Linus Ullmark, and how they stack up against the Atlantic Division goaltending tandems. So let's get into it, shall we?
You're Locked On Bruins, your daily podcast on the Boston Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Bruins fans, and welcome back to the Locked On Boston Bruins podcast. I'm your host, Ian McLaren, and this is a daily show where we discuss all things Spoked B, as well as take a look around the NHL. Very excited today to talk goaltending with Mike Amato, a guy that I used to work with at the Score, and who has gone on to write for Dobber Hockey, Sportsnet. I was able to actually go last night to the live 32 Thoughts podcast in Kitchener, and I'll talk about that near the end of the podcast. Quick reminder that you can subscribe on your favorite podcast app as well as on YouTube, so please do so today if you have not already, and you can find the podcast on social media at Locked NHL Bruins. You can find me, my dad jokes, hockey tweets, at Ian C. McLaren. So let us bring Mike on here. How's it going, Mike?
Doing well, Ian. How about yourself?
I'm doing well. Yeah, as I was saying, you and I worked together back at the Score several years ago, and yeah, always good to chat, catch up, and excited to see that you've moved on to Sportsnet for your fantasy hockey writing this season. That's really awesome, and congratulations for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. I'm looking forward to it.
Now, Mike is a guy that I have bothered many times via DM for fantasy hockey advice, and he's very knowledgeable when it comes to picking out keepers, goalies, and I wanted to bring him on to talk about, first of all, the Boston Bruins goaltending tandem of Jeremy Swayman and Linus Ullmark, one that was pretty effective last season. There was that brief interruption with Tuukka Rask's attempted comeback and Jeremy Swayman sent down to the AHL. But first, just a quick take on what you saw from this tandem last season, and if there's potential for them to be even better here in the upcoming season.
Yeah, so I think they're two goalies with a lot of promise, especially Swayman, being a bit of a younger guy. I think there's a lot of talent there. I think just with the Bruins, they're probably one of the more fascinating teams to me heading into the season, just because there's so much, I think, change with them, between the coaching and the injuries that they're going to deal with for the start of the year. And the thing that kind of intrigues me about Swayman and Ullmark is how is the sort of loss of Bruce Cassidy gonna impact them? Because I know everyone like to talk about Barry Trotz being the most goalie friendly coach, but I always thought it was Bruce Cassidy. I think in the 5 years he was there, I think the Bruins ranked first, second, and fourth in goals against, and they were really structured defensively, really strong in that regard. And I think that really helps a young goalie like someone like Jeremy Swayman, who's trying to find his footing, maybe not the most experienced. I think he really benefits from something like that. Ullmark as well. And yeah, so I'm sure Jim Montgomery's going to have his own systems he's going to implement, but I don't know if they're going to be as strong as Cassidy's. And I think if you add in, okay, you got no Charlie McAvoy, you got no Mac Rizlik for the first little bit. Marchand's going to miss some time too, so maybe the puck's going to be in your end a little bit more. Again, I'm not saying it's going to be a disaster, but I just wonder how those type of things are going to impact Swayman and Ullmark, because I think as we're starting to learn, a lot of goaltending now in the NHL is really just a product of the team in front of you and how that's structured. Say a handful of elite guys like the Shesterkins, the Vasilevskis, the Saroses, etc. I think there's a lot of goalies that are just really comfortable and are able to play in a certain system. So I'm really intrigued to see how some of these changes impact Swayman and Ullmark.
And at the same time, you mentioned Bruce Cassidy. Vegas's goalie situation is a topic for a
Yeah,
different podcast, but their goalie situation is quite fascinating at the moment as well. I in one league I picked up Aiden Hill, hoping that he sneaks into the mix somehow. But if Bruce Cassidy can get top level goaltending out of those guys with Robin Leonard on the shelf, then it will really be a testament to how good of a coach that he is.
yeah.
Did you want to talk about that at all? The Vegas goalie situation. How do you see that playing
Sure.
out?
Yeah, I think a lot of people are looking at Hill and Logan Thompson as
Right.
like trendy picks in fantasy. That's for sure. Two
Yeah.
goalies you can maybe get a little bit later in your drafts, and two guys that have a lot of upside, especially if Vegas rebounds, right? Like I think that's the big question. Like,
Right.
is Vegas closer to the team they were last year, or did they just have a bunch of injuries and they're more likely, a sort of maybe like top five, top 10 team in the league? If they are,
Yeah.
then you're probably going to get a ton of value out of Hill and Thompson, right?
Right. Right. In one league, I had Robin Leonard and Carey Price as keepers,
Oh,
and so that
yeah.
it's a bit of scrambling there.
Uh,
In terms of the Bruins, do you see a pretty even split again between Swayman and Ullmark, or do you think it's possible that one or the other could get maybe 60 no, maybe not 60 starts, but 60% of the starts anyways? Or do you think it'll be an even 50-50 again?
I think it will probably be closer to 50-50. I think someone could always sort of step up and steal the job a little bit more, especially if there's an injury there and they get on a little bit of a run. But I think probably with those two, I think they're pretty comparable in the way they played last year.
Right.
And I think there's a good chance it's closer to 50-50 just because, again, like Swayman's pretty inexperienced. So I don't know if
Right.
you want to give him like 60 plus percent of the starts at this point, depending on the workload he can handle. And yeah, and like I think the Bruins are, they're going to be a pretty strong team. I just don't think they need to ride one guy necessarily as much.
Right.
So
That makes sense. All right, we're going to talk about the Atlantic Division goaltending situation here in a moment. But first, a quick word about betonline.net, your number one source for football betting info this season. You can find all the latest developments, matchups, news, podcasts, and in depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. BetOnline is your continued source for all sports wagering information, the fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games and events, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, NHL, NBA right around the corner. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more at BetOnline, where the game starts. So, Mike, I think it's fair to say that the best goalie tandem in the Atlantic is Andre Vasilevsky plus whoever the backup is.
whoever, yeah,
It'll be Brian Elliott, I guess, but
yeah,
that's probably the for sure best goalie in the Atlantic Division without question, right?
yeah, I think so. Like Vasilevsky and anyone pretty much is the best tandem.
Yeah.
I was talking about this the other day. I think like Vasilevsky may just play slightly less this year, just because I think I think the Lightning have proved like they don't really need to finish first overall, get the President's Trophy. As long as they get in the playoffs, they'll be fine. And I think Vasilevsky, when you include the playoffs over the last 3 years, played more than anyone in goal, right? So it would
Right.
probably make sense to give him like 55 starts instead of 65. I think they'll still be fine, and then he'll be fresh for the playoffs.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, we saw last year they have no problem winning a game 7 on the
Yeah.
road. Um, I think from there it gets a bit more interesting in the Atlantic. Obviously, we can talk about the Maple Leafs and their goaltending situation, going from Jack Campbell and some backups to now Ilya Samsonov, Matt Murray. How confident are you in that either of those guys backstopping the Maple Leafs this season?
Yeah, I think their goaltending is probably the most uncertain it's been in a long time in Toronto. And, Murray has, a good pedigree, but he's really had trouble staying healthy the last few years, been really inconsistent. Samsonov's shown some flashes in Washington, but he's been really inconsistent. I think the thing about Toronto like it's weird. I don't want to say like they don't need goaltending, but like last year, I think they finished fourth overall in the NHL. Set a franchise record in points, and I believe they were like 23rd in save
Yeah.
percentage. So it
Yeah.
didn't really impact them too much. So I don't think it's going to matter too much in the regular season. I think
Hmm.
where it's going to potentially impact them will be the playoffs, right? Like
Right.
the Leafs need a goalie that in a game 7 or in a game 6 is going to give them that extra save. Um, is that guy Matt Murray? Is that guy Samsonov? I'm not sure. I think Samsonov might end up being the better value just because Murray's shown he's struggled to stay healthy. So if he's out, I
Right.
think Samsonov might play more by default. But yeah, it's interesting. The whole division has a lot of tandems like that. Outside of
Yeah.
I would say Tampa, a lot of teams where both guys could start. So
Yeah. Yeah. Matt Murray. I mean, we've seen he has the potential to do that in the past. His career has been pretty fascinating, coming in and winning a couple cups,
yeah,
and then just kind of falling off the earth. I mean, playing with the Senators last couple of years obviously didn't help, but um, that could be a pretty big high reward possibly for the Maple Leafs if he returns to form, but it could also end up crashing and burning, and I'm sure a lot of people would find that pretty entertaining if that were to happen. Anyways,
yeah,
uh,
for sure.
the uh, the Florida Panthers are pretty interesting as well. They have an established guy in Sergei Bobrovsky who's making $10 million, a young guy in Spencer Knight. Um, I feel like it's similar to the Bruins situation, except the gap in salary is a lot wider. Do you see kind of a similar tandem there? Bobrovsky looked pretty good at times last season, but do you think Spencer Knight will eventually ramp up and get some more starts there for the Panthers?
Yeah, I think he'll play a little bit more in the last sort of 2 months of the season last year. He played a little bit more and he played a lot better. I think he started off a little slow. Knight did last year, and then he really found his game. So I think that's going to be more of a tandem this year than it has in the past. The Panthers were used to playing Bobrovsky a ton, and rightfully so for what they're paying him. But yeah, I think like obviously in a perfect world for them, if they could use Knight a lot more, and I heard a lot of rumors they were trying to trade Bobrovsky this summer. Obviously, that's super complicated
Yeah.
just with his salary. So, but yeah, if you have a goalie like Knight that is on an entry level deal still, and can play well for you, that's obviously a huge advantage. But yeah, I think for now, and like Bobrovsky wasn't bad last year. It's just like he goes through some inconsistent stretches at times. So yeah, I
Right.
think you'll see that more this year, more of a split between those two.
Now, I'm personally pretty invested in the Ottawa tandem. In one fantasy league, I have both Cam Talbot and Anton Forsberg. Obviously, a lot of people talking about the Senators this offseason, the additions they made up front. I'm still a bit nervous about their blue line, and these goalies might be called upon to make some big, many saves. But do you think that tandem could work for the Ottawa Senators and could? I think it's a bit premature to say playoff contention for them, but markedly improved this season at the very least with those two guys in net.
Yeah, like it's funny because when they got rid of Matt Murray, it felt like Forsberg was going to be the starter, and then a couple days later they get Cam Talbot, right? So it's interesting. Like Talbot's 35. I don't know. It's going to get harder and harder for a 35-year-old goalie to stay healthy to play, a ton of hockey. So I think Forsberg's going to play a lot too. And I thought Forsberg, like the second half of the season last year, I thought he was probably the most consistent goalie in the whole league. Like he had, I think 32 of his final 40 starts, he was above 900. Like he was just producing
Oh wow.
quality starts consistently. Obviously the wins weren't coming, but yeah, like you said, I think the Sens are that team that everyone's picking to make a jump this year. I liked a lot of the additions they made, but I also agree with you. I think their defense is still not quite there. So yeah, I think it depends on how much of a step they take forward and how it will impact those two guys. But yeah, I think that's another tandem that's going to be close to 50-50 split. I could see that happening again. Both guys playing a lot, And if they can play well, if Forsberg can play the way he did last year, if Talbot can play the way he did in Minnesota, I think they're gonna at least push for a playoff spot anyway.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the bottom of the Atlantic, I don't think we need to talk too much about the Sabres goaltending. Craig Anderson, you mentioned Talbot being 35. Anderson's, I
40,
think he might.
40 something.
Yeah, he's already 40 something.
Yeah.
Eric Comrie might get a bunch of starts. I don't think that team necessarily will be taken too seriously until they get, like an established franchise goalie in there. The Canadians will be rolling with Jake Allen and Caden Primo, I guess. Not too worried about those two. The one other tandem I wanted to get your take on was Ville Husso and Nedeljkovic in Detroit. A Calder finalist a couple years ago, a guy who took the starting job in St. Louis last season from Jordan Binnington. What do you make of that tandem here to wrap up this morning?
Yeah, I think Husso is probably going to have some of the same challenges that Nedeljkovic did last year. Going from a really strong team, a pretty solid defensive team, to a team not as strong. I think Detroit is. I mean, they're probably maybe half a step behind Ottawa, I would say, in their rebuild.
Yeah.
I think they're coming up, but they're not quite there yet. And I think if you look at Ned's numbers last year, he went from like a 932 save in Carolina to a 900 last season when he got to Detroit. So I wonder if Husso's going to suffer the same fate. But they're two good bets, right, for Yzerman and the Wings. Like, two good young goalies, a lot of talent. And as Detroit grows, I mean, I'm sure they're going to grow with them. And if they can find one quality starter between those two, I think they'll be doing pretty good. So.
Mm-hmm. One last question for you. Just looking at the Atlantic Division as a whole, I kind of see the same top four and bottom four as last season. There could be some movement within those two groups, but do you see that kind of breakdown as well? Ottawa, Detroit, not quite ready to take a spot. Boston, Florida, Tampa, Toronto as the top four teams still in the Atlantic.
I do, yeah. I think it will be not as wide of a gap this year. I think, I think by the last probably 6 weeks of the season, I think everyone knew who the four playoff teams were going to be. I think Ottawa and Detroit might push a little harder this year. I think for the Bruins, as long as they can survive those first 2 months, I think where some of their key guys are going to be out, I think they'll be fine, and I think they'll probably nail down one of those four spots as well.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, Mike, thanks so much for taking some time to chat this morning. Where can people find your fantasy hockey writing, and where can people find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter at Amato_Mike. And starting next week, you can find me on sportsnet.ca and goaliepost.com.
Very cool. Well, thanks again. Have a great rest of the day, and I'm sure I'll reach out at some point during the season to check in and catch up and have you back on the podcast.
Sounds great, Ian. Thanks for having me.
All right. Take care, man.
Sure.
All right. Huge thank you to Mike for coming on the podcast, breaking down the goaltending situation around the Atlantic Division. The Bruins are in action tonight in preseason, taking the at home, and you can check Locked NHL Bruins later on today for the roster announcement and potential live in it. And again, a lot of encouraging stuff going on in camp. Boral talked about yesterday. Nick Foligno ready for a fresh start, had a reset, had a really good summer, and the build, of course, off last year's 2-goal season. Jim Montgomery looking to get more out of the player as well. I mentioned off the top that I attended the 32 Thoughts live show last night in Kitchener, Ontario, obviously hosted by Jeff Merrick and Elliotte Friedman. It was good to meet those two and to chat for a little bit. They had Mike McKenzie there. He's the general manager for the Kitchener Rangers of the OHL, also Bob McKenzie's son, or one of them. They had Scott Walker there. He, of course, is a former NHL player, scored the Game 7 goal in 2009 against the Boston Bruins, which they briefly discussed. He also coaches the OHL's Guelph Storm, Matthew Poitras. And as much as it's hard to be a fan of the guy who scored that goal in 2009, he's very likable and told some pretty great stories. One of which was about a clip that you can find on YouTube, him chasing Sean Avery, trying to get him to fight, which was a pretty hilarious story. Steve Dangle was also there talking about his woes when it comes to following the Toronto Maple Leafs. There was a Q&A, and I was able to ask Elliotte Friedman about the David Pastrnak situation, and he gave a pretty encouraging response. He said he's confident something will get done, and he doesn't get the sense there's any acrimony that would prevent a deal. There were reports in the summer that perhaps David Pastrnak was reluctant to sign with the Bruins based on uncertainty looking ahead to the future, who's going to be playing center. He wants a chance to win, etc. But he took some time this summer to reset, get centered physically, mentally, and as Elliotte Friedman said on the 32 Thoughts podcast on Monday, Pastrnak is comfortable going into the season and continuing talks there. I don't believe it's a situation where once the season starts, there will be no talk about it. So hopefully something gets done. He added Charlie McAvoy, set the standard for a new kind of deal in Boston. Pasternak's number will likely be in the $10 million ballpark. So we can expect him to be the highest paid player in Bruins history. And, earning double-digit millions for an original 6-team. Nothing to sneeze at. I believe that is it for today's podcast. It was a very fun event last night. Again, Jeff Merrick, Elliotte Friedman, just class acts. The event was supposed to be from 7 to 8:30. It didn't end till after 9:30, and they were committed to sticking around until the very last person was there who wanted a picture to chat. So that was very cool of them to do that. It was hilarious because the venue is a bowling alley, bar, pizza restaurant, and then the big room upstairs. I went down to get a drink. The bar right beside the bowling alley, and they were having a game of bowling before the event, which was pretty fun to see. Anyways, thank you so much again to Mike for the goalie insight. Do follow him on Twitter and check out his fantasy stuff. He's a gold mine of information. And we'll be back on the podcast tomorrow. I believe tomorrow I'm chatting with the Locked On Senators guy, so we'll get some more insight on Ottawa and maybe talk about tonight's preseason results as well. So have a great Tuesday, everybody. We'll talk to you again here tomorrow on the Locked On Bruins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your favorite team every single day.